and by evening, she was scared and exhausted. David was working late, as usual, and Cherry found herself alone in the house, worried that something might be wrong with the baby. She called David's office, but his secretary said he was in a meeting and couldn't be disturbed. Cherry explained that she was having complications with her pregnancy and needed him to come home, but the secretary just took a message and said she would give it to David when he was free. Hours passed, and David didn't call back. Cherry's pains were getting worse, and she was starting to panic. She called her parents, but they were out of town visiting relatives. She called her doctor, but he said the symptoms she described sounded like false labor and that she should rest and see how she felt in the morning. But Cherry knew something was wrong. She could feel it in her body, in the way the baby had stopped moving, in the intensity of the pain that was different from anything she had experienced before. She needed someone to take her to the hospital, but she had no one to call. That's when she remembered Simon's card. She hesitated for a long time, knowing that calling him would cross a line in her marriage. But she was scared and alone, and David had made it clear that he wasn't going to be there for her when she needed him most. Simon answered on the second ring. "Cherry, what's wrong?" "I think something's wrong with the baby," Cherry said, her voice shaking. "I need to get to the hospital, but David isn't answering his phone, and I don't have anyone else to call." "I'll be there in 10 minutes," Simon said without hesitation. "Don't worry about anything. I'm on my way." Simon arrived at Cherry's house faster than seemed possible. He helped her into his car, grabbed her hospital bag, and drove to the emergency room with the kind of calm competence that made Cherry feel safe for the first time in months. He stayed with her through the admission process, held her hand during the examination, and was there when the doctor confirmed that she was in early labor. "The baby is coming tonight," the doctor said. "Is your husband on his way?" Cherry looked at Simon, who was still holding her hand. "I don't know where my husband is," she said quietly. Simon squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "You're not going through this alone." Cherry gave birth to a healthy baby girl at 3 a.m. Simon was there for the entire labor, coaching her through contractions, bringing her iced chips, and celebrating with her when the baby finally arrived. He was the first person to hold her daughter after Cherry, and the look on his face was one of pure joy and wonder. David arrived at the hospital at 7 a.m, 3 hours after his daughter was born. He looked tired and slightly annoyed, as if he had been inconvenienced by having to come to the hospital. When he saw Simon sitting in the chair next to Cherry's bed, his face turned red with anger. "What is he doing here?" David asked, his voice loud enough to wake the baby. "He brought me to the hospital when you couldn't be bothered to answer your phone," Cherry said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "He was here when our daughter was born because you weren't." David demanded that Simon leave, but Simon refused to go until he was sure that Cherry and the baby were okay. He kissed Cherry's forehead gently and whispered, "Call me if you need anything." "I mean it." After Simon left, David and Cherry had the fight that had been building for months. David accused Cherry of humiliating him by calling another man to help her. Cherry accused David of abandoning her when she needed him most. They said things to each other that couldn't be taken back, and when it was over, they both knew that their marriage was finished. David filed for divorce 2 weeks later. He claimed that Cherry had been unfaithful and that the baby wasn't his, despite the paternity test that proved otherwise. He fought for custody of their daughter, not because he wanted to raise her, but because he wanted to punish Cherry for embarrassing him. But Cherry had changed during her pregnancy and childbirth. She was no longer the quiet, accommodating girl who put everyone else's needs before her own. She had found her voice and her strength, and she was ready to fight for her daughter and her future. Simon stood by her throughout the divorce proceedings. He helped her find a good lawyer, provided emotional support during the difficult legal battles, and never asked for anything in return. He was everything that David wasn't: supportive, loving, and genuinely interested in Cherry's happiness. As the divorce was being finalized, Jane returned from Australia. She had been gone for 2 years, and her life overseas had not turned out the way she had hoped. She was broke, lonely, and ready to come home to the family that had always loved her unconditionally. Cherry's parents were overjoyed to have Jane back. They welcomed her with open arms and immediately began treating her like the prodigal daughter who had returned home. They asked about her adventures, sympathized with her struggles, and made it clear that all was forgiven. But Cherry was not ready to forgive and forget. She had spent 2 years dealing with the consequences of Jane's impulsive decision to leave. She had married a man who didn't love her, endured a loveless marriage, and raised a daughter alone, all to protect the family's reputation after Jane's departure. "I'm sorry about what happened with David," Jane said during their first real conversation since she had returned. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen, but you didn't try to stop it either," Cherry replied. "You knew that David loved you, and you knew that I loved him. But you left anyway, and you let me deal with the mess you made." Jane looked genuinely remorseful. "I was selfish and immature. I thought I was following my dreams, but I was really just running away from responsibility. I see that now." "I'm glad you see it now," Cherry said. "But seeing it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that I married a man who wished I was you every single day." The conversation between the sisters was painful but necessary. Jane admitted that she had been thoughtless and selfish, and Cherry finally expressed the anger and hurt that she had been carrying for years. They didn't magically reconcile, but they began the process of rebuilding their relationship on more honest terms. David, meanwhile, had been watching Jane's return with renewed interest. He began showing up at the Parker house again, ostensibly to see his daughter, but really to spend time with Jane. He seemed to think that Jane's return meant that they could pick up where they had left off, as if the marriage to Cherry had been just a temporary detour. But Jane had changed during her time in Australia. She had learned hard lessons about love, responsibility, and the consequences of her actions. She was no longer the carefree girl who had left 2 years earlier. She was a woman who had experienced heartbreak and disappointment, and she was not interested in repeating old patterns. When David finally worked up the courage to tell Jane that he was getting divorced and that he still loved her, Jane's response surprised everyone. "I'm flattered, David, but I'm not interested in starting a relationship with you," she said. "What you did to Cherry was wrong. You married her to make yourself feel better about me leaving, and then you treated her terribly when she needed you most. I could never be with someone who would do that to another person." David was stunned. He had never considered that Jane might reject him based on how he had treated Cherry. He had assumed that once he was free from his marriage, Jane would be grateful for his devotion and loyalty. "But I only married her because I couldn't have you," David said. "Everything I did was because I loved you." "That's exactly the problem," Jane replied. "You used Cherry to make yourself feel better about losing me. You married her to save face, not because you cared about her. And then you abandoned her when she needed you most. That's not love, David. That's selfishness." David's rejection by Jane was the final blow to his ego. He had lost Cherry, lost his daughter, and now lost Jane as well. He had sacrificed everything for his reputation and his pride, and he had ended up with nothing. Cherry, meanwhile, was building a new life with Simon. Their relationship had started as friendship and support, but it had grown into something deeper and more meaningful. Simon loved Cherry for who she was, not as a substitute for someone else. He adored her daughter and treated her like his own child. He was the partner that Cherry had always dreamed of having. When Simon proposed to Cherry, it was everything her first engagement had not been. He told her that he loved her, that he couldn't imagine his life without her, and that he wanted to spend the rest of his life making her happy. He got down on one knee not because it was socially expected, but because he was genuinely excited about the prospect of marrying her. Cherry's parents, who had initially been skeptical of Simon because of his reputation as David's rival, came to see how much he loved their daughter. They apologized to Cherry for the way they had treated her, for pushing her into a marriage that made her unhappy, and for always favoring Jane over her. "We were wrong, Cherry," her father said. "We took you for granted, and we pushed you into a situation that wasn't fair to you. We're sorry." Her mother added, "We always thought you were so strong and independent that you didn't need as much attention as Jane did. But we realize now that everyone needs to feel loved and valued. We failed you as parents, and we're sorry." Cherry's wedding to Simon was everything her first wedding had not been. It was small and intimate, with only the people who truly cared about her happiness. Simon's vows were heartfelt and personal, and when he kissed her at the altar, Cherry felt like she was finally home. As Cherry began her new life with Simon, she set clear boundaries with her family. She made it clear that she would not be taken for granted anymore, that her needs and feelings mattered, and that she would not sacrifice her happiness for anyone else's reputation or convenience. Jane, who had learned her own lessons about the importance of family and responsibility, respected Cherry's boundaries and worked to rebuild their relationship slowly and honestly. She got a job, contributed to the household, and showed through her actions that she had changed. Cherry's story became a testament to the power of self-respect and the importance of standing up for yourself. She had learned that love without respect is not really love at all, and that sometimes the people who claim to care about you are the ones who are most willing to sacrifice your happiness for their own comfort. In the end, Cherry found the love and happiness that she had always deserved. She had a husband who cherished her, a daughter who was growing up strong and confident, and a family that finally understood her worth. She had learned that she didn't have to settle for being someone's second choice, and that her own happiness was worth fighting for. The story of Cherry and Jane serves as a reminder that families should love and support all their children equally, and that no one should have to sacrifice their dreams and happiness to maintain someone else's reputation. It shows that real love is about respect, support, and genuine care for another person's well-being, not about convenience or social expectations. Subscribe for more stories about finding your worth and never settling for less than you deserve.